Welcome, one and all, throughout time and space for this episode of Weebs on the Weekends, the podcast where we break down the anime new highlights of the week and give a retrospective look on an anime that premiered 10 years ago. Today's episode will cover the anime news for the first week of September 2021, as well as our thoughts on whether to resurrect or rebury the 2011 anime Kamisama Dolls. My name is Sam Martinez. I'm a part-time weeb, full-time automail mechanic. With me, as always, is my co-host, Jay Johnson, part-time weeb, full-time English language sensei. Now, Jay, it just seems like the last week or so I've just been on this movie kick. We've mentioned before how Evangelion had all of their movies on Amazon, so I've sort of been like trudging along through that, and yesterday, I saw Shang-Chi in theaters, but the thing is, it's funny because I went to one of those bougie theaters where they have the people come and serve you food and drinks. It was ridiculous because the popcorn bowl was this really ornate looking bowl that sort of oblonged, looked like a part of an egg, but the thing that was interesting was there was an alcoholic drink called the Martinez. So I was basically a Martinez having a Martinez in the theater.
Do you know what it was like the drink consisted of?
It's Ransom Old Tom Gin, Caparno Antico, Luxardo Maraschino, and Orange Creme Citron.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. I mean, gin is like a little bit like low tier on my alcohol list. I mean, it's probably my least favorite ingredient in a Long Island iced tea, but man, just sounds like a good time for your mouth, really.
I would have to say it's definitely one of those sipping drinks. You can't take that to a party and just down it. You have to take your time with it. But it was a good time, and I had to say it was a good pairing for me in my Shang-Chi experience. But how about you, Jay? How has your week been so far?
I mean, I've also seen Shang-Chi, Legend of the Ten Rings, and I have many thoughts on it. So, we don't want to get into spoilers on an anime podcast about a Marvel movie that's not animated. But I was sitting through the credits, and of course, well, not of course, but there's a mid-credit scene and a after-credit scene. So
yes,
please stay tuned for both of those because I really much enjoyed the end credit scene immensely. But for overall, I was just sitting there like looking at all the people responsible for the movie, and I was like, man, this is a great movie. And I was like, I just want to go buy another ticket for it. And I haven't felt that way for a Marvel movie in a pretty long time. My top 5 or top 3 are probably unmovable for certain reasons, but Shang-Chi is pretty up there. And how they like reincorporate like the Ten Rings back into the Marvel Cinematic lore with how it left off with Iron Man 3 and the Mandarin is so interesting. And it's not much of a retcon, but it's like one of those, you really get a sense of how big the Marvel universe is through the movies. And of course, they're never going to be the comic books, but Marvel is doing a good job expanding it because the following movies are the Eternals November. Is Doctor Strange first or Spider-Man first?
It's Spider-Man. Spider-Man, then Doctor Strange.
Then Doctor Strange, of course, yeah. And even Sam, like, in line, oh my gosh, I have not seen the trailer to Shang-Chi.
You were able to go in blind. You haven't seen any of the trailers?
Well, okay, so as I'm standing in line behind the counter, the trailer's playing for the movie.
No!
And for the first time, I see what the 10 rings are, and I'm like, oh man, I was so close. I was so close because I haven't seen posters, I hadn't seen any of the trailers, and I hadn't seen any like stills, which I usually like tap into to see like who's performing or who's like responsible for certain things. But yeah, I was like, man, that would have been so cool in the moment. But yeah, the 10 rings are how they appear in the movie are so outstandingly well done, like from a visual art standpoint. And I just loved the movie. It's just like one of those heartfelt stories of that the Marvel universe doesn't really tap into that much. Like there's a very hard through line or motif of grief in the film and how like a family deals with handling like the death of a family member. and that really resonates hard. I don't see any other place in the Marvel Cinematic Universe but Black Panther, really. So I would say like Black Panther and Shang-Chi kind of vibe into that same human dynamic.
I would say that a little bit of it too is in Civil War, and you get a little bit of it, but there's just so much going on. But if you track Black Panther's character arc, it in Civil War, it mainly follows how he deals with grief and how he comes on the other side. But it does deal with it a lot more in Black Panther, as you said, because it's one of the main focuses. And I would say like that's why this sort of works. When you look at Shang-Chi in terms of story, it's not particularly different, but it feels different. As you said, it focuses on the family trauma, and it's framed in a way to where it feels intimate. It feels more grounded and lower level, even though they deal with something that's as grand scale and very international. I would also like to say too that it feels like a Chinese martial arts film. They credit the artist Brad Allen in memory of him at the end of the film, and he worked with Jackie Chan's martial arts company. So I can imagine that the amazing choreography of the fight scenes that happened in this film were due to him, and he had passed earlier on this year. And I would also like to add that I really like how they handled the Chinese culture in the film, because Shang-Chi is Chinese in the comics, and they really thrived with it, so much so that essentially the 10 rings are it's I guess like it's not really a spoiler, as you said, like because they talk about it in the trailers, because the 10 rings are some of the iron rings that you would see in Chinese martial arts films, and it's called Hungar. And whereas in the comics, the rings were actual rings that you wear on your finger. And I feel as though like this translation, it works so much more, especially with the culture and with how they're trying to bring Shang-Chi into the universe. And even though I'm a bit of a comic purist, I find that transition very tasteful, and it works very well for the universe. So it's definitely worth a watch. And before we turn this into a Shang-Chi podcast, do we want to go into the news, or do you have any more thoughts that you want to say before we do that?
No, I mean, a Shang-Chi podcast sounds pretty awesome, but yeah, I do have news for us. And yeah, so let's go into the news. Ready for some news, Sam?
I am ready for some news. Lay it on us, Jay.
All right, so as always, time codes are going to be in the description. So we have our news for the week as well as our 10-year anime discussion. So first news story of the week, again, is catering to you, Sam, because that's what I like to do when I'm responsible for the news. So our first news story is that the Gundam series Zeta, the original narrative and wing, is coming to Funimation streaming on September 7th. So that is a couple of days from now from the recording of this episode. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this new wave of Gundam series like coming to the forefront of Funimation, because back in 2020, they put on their service both Gundam Seed Destiny, as well as Unicorn. So it seems like there's been a very recent uptick. Maybe we've been just focusing on Gundam news for the past year for some reason. No, I mean, there is a good reason that Gundam is making a comeback, essentially, with the Netflix adaptation, as well as the 100-year project that Sunrise is pushing. But it's really interesting that right now that they are having the official English dub done for all these animes. So it's coming to the UK, the US, all these English-speaking territories, as well as getting more official translations done and having them doled out later in the year. So the next step is for Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Brazil for Portuguese and Spanish-speaking countries. So it seems like Sunrise is doing a lot recently to push their Gundam franchise. So from what's going to be released coming up, Sam, the Zeta, the narrative, the original, and Wing, what would you recommend that people check out first?
Mainly because of the age group that I came up with. it seems as though Wing is a staple. So it because it's not a part of the Universal Century lore, you can watch it standalone and have an understanding of its story and not necessarily have to do any work. So for instance, with Zeta Gundam, you have to have watched the original one, the one that came out in the 70s, to really understand and watch it. And I'm glad that they're starting to show that now, because with talking with some of my friends who are more of a Gundam fan than I am, he was appalled that I hadn't watched Zeta, and he chewed me out for my thoughts on it. So I am now glad that it's going to be available for me to watch, so that I can be in his good graces once again. I see that the origin is going to be on there as well. I would say if you're not going to start with Wing, start with Origin. I take that back. Because Origin, it's basically the accounts of the first season, but it's coming from Char's perspective, which is essentially the antagonist at the time. So it frames the story a bit differently, and it is more of an up to date look. With it has like modern animation techniques and modern drawing styles, so it feels more comfortable for you to try to understand the story. But again, because it's from the antagonist perspective, they go in there assuming that you knew what happened. They don't necessarily explain what's going to happen in the story. So I would say at least try Gundam Wing if you are new to the Gundam franchise and see how you like it. Give it the benefit of the doubt because it is an older franchise, but it has one of the strongest characters and one of the most iconic scenes of rejection in there. I would also say, because you had brought this up, that the Gundam franchise, Gundam Iron Blooded Orphans, it's now going to be streamed for free on Sunrise's YouTube channel as well. So it seems, as you said, they're doing like this big push everywhere to try to make their franchises more available to the populace.
Yeah, because the Gundam franchise is one of those touchstones of Japanese anime, and how it's been like educated, or has educated the populace in the West about like what good anime is, essentially. So
Yes.
now that it's coming to Funimation and you're getting official dubs, getting official like Blu-ray released or 4K releases, there's going to be just an uptick for what's going to be consumed in the near future, especially with, you spoke highly of the Hathaway movie that just came out this year. So we'll see. We'll probably have another follow-up story to see that there's some Gundam series that aren't available in Funimation. So we'll probably come back to this story if more series become available. So for our second news story, maybe this is more Sam news, but this is that Production IG's film, The Deer King, has been postponed once again. This is actually a anime film that I was looking forward to, but we're both fans of Production IG. And it was originally slated for last year, same time last year, so September 18, 2020, and has been essentially pushed or been moved off the release schedule, so has no announced date to when it's been moved to, basically because of how the numbers have been increasing in Japan recently, and looking at to be another quarantine mandate to shut down theaters or close space for venues. Even though that's, it's not been really much reported on, but the Paralympics are ending tomorrow, September the 5th. So I'm trying to catch up right now on a lot of the events, and being amazed at how far prosthetics have come in the past 4 years to allow these athletes compete at a higher level in their classes. But back to the actual news. Yeah, so maybe we'll come back to that, Sam. Like maybe we'll do another highlight of what happened for the Olympics and what happened at the Paralympics. But for this news story, that The Deer Hunter is actually based on a medical a medical fantasy novel, which I didn't know was a subgenre.
That's a genre, the medical fantasy. So it's just like this shaman doctor, or I would think. Now that I think about it, like, would that be Mushishi? Would Mushishi fall into that category or no?
Yes, it would. That was the other manga series or anime that I recognized when I looked in a little bit more into the subgenre. So we talked about cooking last episode, and I was like, oh, so here's another subgenre story. But yeah, there's also even a Japan Medical Novel Award, which
What?
the Deer Hunter won for a couple of years ago. But this was a novel published in 2014, is essentially telling the story of a war-stricken country where this mysterious illness pops up, and it centers on a general that is basically captured. He becomes a slave and he escapes. And the novel follows him through like interconnected stories of people suffering from disease as well as suffering due to the war that's going on in their country. So there's a lot of elements going on, and this movie has been really much acclaimed because it has been shown at international film festivals. Its novel has won several international awards as well as the Japan Bestsellers Award because it tracked with circulation a certain number. I forgot what that certain number was. But I've been really looking forward to this movie, and it's been just pushed off the schedule. So, Stan, based off of that premise and its acclaim, would you be interested in seeing the Deer King?
Yes and no, mainly because I know that Mushishi is very episodic in nature, and I don't know how I would take to that long form in terms of a movie. However, looking at some of the people that are attached to this film, Masashi Ando being the character designer in Princess Mononoke, Tokyo Godfathers, and Your Name, it being the anime director. Also, like you said, being a product of Production IG, it makes me a little bit more interested to wanting to see how it's going to be drawn, how it's going to be animated. I would like to see a trailer to see if there's going to be any action or if it's going to be more of a slow burn and very character driven like Mushishi was. However, I see it seems as though that this mangaka also did Moribito. I really enjoyed Moribito. I hadn't had a chance to finish it, but the premise it's in Moribito it's very similar to what you said about the Jerry King being in a war stricken country. And with Moribito, it enticed me because it followed somebody that was a fighter. And we are following a general as well, but it seems as though he's mainly, his main objective is to help with medical necessity, not necessarily with combat. But that doesn't mean that we may not be able to see him throw some hands. So, like I said, I would like to see a trailer first. I'm interested, but I'm not necessarily sold on it.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair because again, I think it's one of those properties that you do have to see visuals for it first. So at the moment, because it's not announced to when it's been moved to for its release in Japan, however, it's still on the schedule for release in the US in 2022. So that seems to be moving forward, at least given that how the quarantine mandates are different per country. Same thing with the UK. There is a UK release later this year. So it will be appearing in theaters in some places around the world. So depending on where you are, you'll be able to see the Deer King. So on to our third news story, which is a little bit of not anime related, but a little bit anime related. But this is that Kaiju number 8 has won the next manga award for its web category. And the next manga award has been operating for 6 to 7 years now, and it's been a much needed award or accolades for digital media in the manga scene, because we've talked about it's a lot of times in the industry that anime and manga creators are a little bit behind the times, or at least, you know, the producers and the heads of companies are a little bit behind the times. So now that the next manga award exists, it's giving like a spotlight to mangas that are only in digital form. So this includes like publications like Shonen Jump Plus, Kodansha Comics, as well as Manga Plus, and even Viz Media. Viz Media has like a side component of online publications. So the Kaiju number 8 has been, man, growing in popularity for this past year because it hit like a record number of 3 million in circulation with under its first year, which is like really unheard of for digital publications. And now that it's on Shonen Jump Plus, it's kind of competing with other heavy hitters in the Shonen Weekly manga numbers. And we saw this with like Spy X Family, which is rumored to be getting a anime adaptation soon, with others like My Senpai is Annoying, which was the 2018 winner, which I think that PV just released recently, as well as like My Life as a Villainess. So again, like if you're going to track what animes are going to come out in like the coming years, you kind of want to look at what mangas are winning awards right now. So Kaiju number 8 is winning enough awards that warrants like we should be keeping our eye on it. But Sam, have you heard of Kaiju number 8, and are you interested at all at picking up or reading at least the first chapter?
Bro, it seems like you've just been you have treated me so well today by catering 2 news articles to me, because yes, I have been thank you for giving me your thumbs up there, Jay. But yes, I have been following Kaiju number 8. I was unaware that it was a digital only copy. I was actually exposed to it because of Viz Media. I use Viz Media to watch or to read some of my other mangas so I can keep up to date with them. And I was just very interested with Kaiju number 8.
Yeah, so the mangaka is Naoya Matsumoto. And again, just to say that this is probably going to be a anime in probably the next 3 years, potentially, because it's still under, or it just passed its 1 year anniversary. So generally how the manga to anime conversion works is that it needs roughly 2 years of publication before the anime gets in or becomes or gets pre-approved for pre-production. As well as I wanted to talk about just a little bit just about that. The next award is so interesting because they do 50 titles for each category, and the other 2 winners, at least, or the other 2 nominations that really stuck out to me was Deranged Detective, which is by the mangaka that did Hitman Reborn, and the other one is the Prime Minister Club, which is done by the mangaka that did Hatalia. But anything you have to say before we move on, Sam?
I'm trying to think. You said the Deranged Detective. That's not the detective that falls in love with the serial killers that she tries to find, is it?
I actually don't know. The title's a lot longer than the Deranged Detective, so that actually might be part of the translation, but it's like something long and then Deranged Detective, so it might be that one.
Because I know that with that one's fairly new too, and I didn't know if that was I didn't know if that one was an online only type thing too. And it makes sense, like you said, with Kaiju number 8, because it only has 54 chapters. It definitely needs a lot more chapters before it can be translated into anime form.
Exactly, yeah. So if it comes back up the news, we'll talk about it, because I would be very interested to see which anime studio gets the rights to this, because the art in Kaiju number 8, which is oddly translated to Monster number 8, I think it's in Viz Media where I saw Monster number 8, which is such a terrible name translation for that. It just should be Kaiju. But yeah, to say that this is a property that needs to be handled with care, because it feels similar to Chainsaw Man, who's getting the adaptation done by Studio Mappa. So for our last news story, somewhat of a follow-up to your news story from last week, Sam, but the Netflix Cowboy Bebop adaptation will be getting a comic book series and a prequel novel. So it is the prequel novel, or the comic book series, is being done by Dan Waters, who is responsible for the Lucifer comics, which is a part of the Sandman universe that is created by Neil Gaiman, and that the staff writer on Cowboy Bebop is actually doing the prequel novel, which has such a weird long title. So it's the writer is Sean Cummings, and his prequel novel is called Cowboy Bebop, A Syndicate Story, Red Planet Requiem. So 2 colons in that title. But The comic book series is going to be in 4 issues in total that released in December, which a trade back version is coming out in May. And then the prequel novel is coming out on November 23rd, as well a companion book of the Netflix series being made itself is coming out next year in January. So I have so many vibes of this being the same thing that Star Wars did, just overloading the property with like side literature. So I have this concern that this tells us that Netflix isn't really confident in the series at all, that they're trying to bolster like hype around it or to supplement how the series is going to be terrible with like the literature side of it. So this is kind of bad news in my eyes, Sam, but how do you feel with all this extra content that you're getting?
I feel as though it's a little bit akin to some of the comic book movies that are coming out. We've mentioned Shang-Chi. With Black Widow that came out before, it had a two-parter prequel comic. That's something that's normal for American movies that are based off of comic books, so it's definitely understandable. With Cowboy Bebop, it's something that's kind of cool. I am surprised that they're pushing the comic so far back when that they're essentially pushing the comic a month after the property is going to be released. I would assume that since it is Netflix, that they would essentially dump all the episodes at once instead of doing a weekly installment type thing. So it doesn't make, for me, it doesn't make any sense for them to release the comic book series so far after the work has already been put out. I feel as though they're shooting themselves in the foot in that regard.
For sure, because it might also be a situation of like maybe something that is written is going to spoil the series. That might be a case because there have been a lot of cases throughout movies collaborating with written media that one spoils the other. So it might be a case of that. So yeah, I think this might be something to pick up on the next comic book day. But and now that John Cho is kind of the face of this project, and even he said in a interview earlier this week that the comparisons to this series is going to be the comparison to the series that he's doing now to the animated original is inevitable, which is just a true fact. That's not even a news story. But with them taking an approach to doing a prequel story and talking about young Spike and young Vicious and how they were like best of buds and just out there killing and slinging it is going to be like interesting enough. So I'm actually interested to see that side of it. It's just like worrying that this might be a sign that the series itself isn't going to be good. But that is the last news story, Sam. And time to talk about some dolls.
Let's do it. I am ready for it. Thank you for your news, Jay. They have been wonderful. And to our audience, the time codes will be in the dibbly-do box and letting you know when to go back to the news or when we're going to talk about Kamisama Dolls, which is what we're going to be doing right now. Before I get into it, Jay, have you heard about this property before? Is this your first exposure to Kamisama Dolls?
Yes, and I am kind of upset that this is my first exposure because it is another Brainsbase production, and whatever Brainsbase was on in 2011, they need to keep doing it because this is their third. Well, we've talked about 4 of their properties already. So we talked about Do-Ra-Ra last year, which we actually didn't get around to Princess Jellyfish, but that's also anime that's frequently listed as like one of the best of the decade. So maybe we might need to go back in 9 years to talk about Princess Jellyfish when it's 20 years old. But anyways, but yeah, so we talked earlier for this year, 2011, about Natsume's Books of Friends. There is also Penguin Drum, which is popularly talked about again as another best of the decade. And an anime that we didn't talk about, which is a horror comedy, which is Durorin Enma-kun. But yeah, they had 4 anime totals this year, so I'm surprised that for much how I love Do-Ra-Ra, that I had no idea that this was another one of their properties.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And I guess, like, as you said, Brainbase has been doing really good this year. And after watching it, we can go into our thoughts a little bit after I give the synopsis. So a little bit of Kamisama Dolls. We follow this country bumpkin known as Kyohei Kyugo as he celebrates the end of his second year at university in Tokyo. He tries to gather the gumption to ask out his old neighbor, Hibino Shiba. However, as he's trying to spit out the words, both he and his friend run into a disembodied corpse within the hotel where they were celebrating the end of their second year. Shortly after, Kyohei's younger sister shows up with her quote-unquote god, aka Kakashi, saying that the murderer was someone who was imprisoned in their village and recently escaped upon hearing of Kyohei's move to the big city. Now Kyohei must train his sister to become a proper Seiki so that she can properly inherit her new position within the village. But can he reconcile both his past in his mind and in the present to keep his sister and his new family safe? That's what we're here to find out in the show. And the licensors are Sentai Filmworks. As Jay said, the studio is Brainbase. The genre is action, seinen, and supernatural. And we have a rating of R to 17 plus. And this show was or is available off of Crunchyroll, High Dive, Amazon, iTunes, and the Microsoft Store. As you were saying, Jay, earlier, this work was it surprised me how good that it was. It just, the premise about the country kid going to the bigger city, trying to explore what the world is, and then essentially getting pulled back into the drama and issues that have happened in the village that pushed him to move forward. And not only that, sort of reconcile his own past with things that had happened that he has done in the village, and trying to wrestle with that, along with, I guess, being a proper brother and instructor for his sister. Just, the characters are so well done and so very interesting. For instance, I just can't get enough of his younger sister, Utao Kyuga. It's just, with her, she's reserved, but she has personality, and we don't get enough of that character in anime to begin with. Like, for instance, she is very shy when she meets new people, but she is quick to judge and form an opinion on you, like when she sees you. And she sort of sticks to that until you can prove her wrong. But she is also sure and confident in herself in what she does. It's just very it's just a very interesting caricature of a little girl that we don't get a lot, and I just really appreciate that. What are your thoughts on her character?
Oh, specifically her character?
Yeah,
It's
or I
weird.
guess like some of the other characters too.
It is a situation where the characters are so well written because of how they have these like deep human moments, like in the introduction to like the party that they're in, you see that the cinematography is directed in a way of he is looking at his crush essentially, but
Yes.
like everything is like blurred out. It is slightly at an angle, like you as the audience member is like looking around other people from his perspective, and then his friends are hanging off of him saying that, oh, I noticed that you're noticing her, kind of things. So like a lot of it is filmed, or at least written in a way to make you like the characters right up front for their human flaws. Essentially, it's like you get a understanding of their motivations or the things that they want. You get a strong sense of their personalities without them really doing much. It's just like very small moments of interactions or behaviors, like you saying, oh, I know that because I've been that awkward high school or college student before. I don't know how to handle my alcohol, or I'm still dealing with trauma, essentially. And it's interesting that I can't really parallel this to anything in my mind. I think that's because there is this weird mecha kind of component to the show that, of course, like these dolls are like animatronics or some kind of unclear entities that we don't really get an answer to in the first 3 episodes. But even in the opening scene of the show is like some Attack on Titan kind of dark, grim, where like you're carrying crying children and there's a monster raging in the background, and there's like some kind of mystic beam going on, and then you get a dismembered body later in the same episode. But to make that connection back to that mecha theme is that these kids, or at least the main character, is burdened with something that he has done in his past, and it's something powerful essentially. So like as you said in the premise, he's a bumpkin moving to the city, but he's a bumpkin where his village has gods in it. And he's getting away from the supernatural life essentially. And we don't really see that with anime. We don't see that explore that kind of dynamic of a main character that is no longer extraordinary and is trying to become ordinary, essentially. And his younger sister is the one that's like, well, you abandon your family, you abandon your responsibility that you wanted to have a normal life, and then you push that responsibility onto me. And I think that's what you're vibing with, is that she is grown for her age, essentially, but she is still childish in like forming opinions or some of her mannerisms. So it's like balancing that dynamic that mechas do so well about the childish nature of a child, but also the responsibility they carry as a pilot.
No. Like you were on the nose of that. But with her, the way that she said it to him, like she didn't admonish him for making this choice, because, not because, but like from her perspective, it's made it seem as though like she understood that, you know, he didn't want to have that role. Like she still has to process that, you know, she was essentially forced that role. But when we see her, it's not like she blames him for making his choice. We also see, because as you said, he essentially foregoes his position, and foregoes his position as Seiki, and she inherits it, and which means she also inherits his Kakashi. I forgot what name that she gives it, but essentially their wooden doll that has godlike powers. When he in one of the talking about little moments, one of the scenes that was very profound was he went to look for his little sister. I can't remember. I think he wanted to say something encouraging to her, or he wanted to say something that was he wanted to have a moment with her. She wasn't in her room, but the doll was, and he was sort of reminiscing about the time when he used to control the doll, and he said something along the lines to the doll. I can't remember what it was, but it was one of those lines where it's like, you know, we had good times, didn't we? It was like, hopefully you'll keep her safe. And before he can finish his sentence, you see the doll just teleport away, basically not wanting to listen to his talks at all. And then we see it rematerialize near the sister, basically acting like a pillow for her because she's taking a nap. Because like up to that point, you would think that the doll was simply just an automaton, but in that moment you get a sense of personality from the doll. Essentially the doll walking out on Kyohei as Kyohei's trying to have a moment with it, and the doll is like, I don't have time for your BS right now, essentially. Like I found that pretty ironic. Aside from that, one of the other things that's really strong about this anime that really made me want to keep going. Oh my goodness, dude. The intro? What other intro do we get a huge Spanish flair in it, man? Like you get these guitars that are strummed like you would hear a mariachi band, almost just like da 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 dun, and then just the way that the vocals pair it with it has like that same Hispanic like melody in the theme, and it's just giving me all these vibes. I'm just like, I am ready to go. I'm ready to see what's going on, like what this show is about. It's just done so well. Again, like one of those things that we just don't see in a lot of anime, where the music is just influenced by another culture and it's just used very very well. One other thing that's very interesting to me is looking to see how they explain, or I guess like the rules or the nature in using the Kakashis, because as we said before, one of the characters that was imprisoned for using a Kakashi, he has a past with Kyohei, and they keep talking about the incident that was flashback to us that you mentioned, that was very Attack on Titan like. They talk about the incident without giving things away, keeping that mystery box for later on. However, near the end of the third episode, we see a third party that is not from the village, and that is not that is not the person that was imprisoned, but somebody else that has a Kakashi as well. But it's and each Kakashi has a different shape and a different form, and it seems to have different ability. But we were only led to believe that only this one village had these things. But the guy that's essentially trying to apprehend the person that was imprisoned, he talks to Kyohei and basically tells him, if you're going to leave the life, then leave the life behind. Don't try to get back in, right? Essentially saying, make your choice, make, stay in the bed that you make. And it seems as though as we see Kyohei try to train his sister in using her Kakashi more, we get to see Kyohei struggle with the decision that he made on whether or not that was the right choice to make, is to leave the village behind, or if he should try to go back and resume his role as Seiki. And I would be very interested to see what the other, I guess if he was considered a Seiki, what the other people with Kakashis are, like if he's from another village or if he's from the same village. Does the village have multiple Kakashis? Just so many questions that I want answered, and I'm hoping that they would answer them properly.
Yeah, there is a lot of, again, like with the tag of thriller, like you're really set into that mode of thinking, even going into these first three episodes. And I would say like it passes, or passes with flying colors, the three episode test, because even with Aki is the dude that escapes the village. Like he basically essentially somewhat drives a wedge into the main character's thinking about, do I actually need to atone for what I did in the past? And again, like you said, they play the mystery box element pretty well, but not in a distracting kind of annoying way. That they lay out the story piecemeal in enough of a way that is satisfying, and then introducing like a detective character, saying like, oh, the dismembered body is like, why did that happen? Because it is a world that is separate from like the supernatural, essentially. Like one isn't informed to the other, but there are those that exist in both. And that's kind of what the detective kind of leans into, or at least plays up that idea that you can't be a part of both worlds. You have to choose one or the other. And with his sister taking on that responsibility, he doesn't really have a place. He's just like the mentor. And like his sister is really younger than him. Like he's second year university, and I don't know what her age is. I don't know if they declare it, but she seems like 12 or 13.
Yeah, middle school age.
Yeah, so like she's like prime mech pilot age, essentially. Like she's getting a handle of her godlike weapon, essentially. But with Aki, it introduces an element of that our main hero or protagonist is a flawed character, is that there is this past that ties them together, and that one of them was punished and the other one wasn't. And by running away, he kind of escaped justice, or he tried to escape, getting punished properly for what he did. So like you're somewhat curious, or you're intrigued enough to follow the story through. It's only 13 episodes. It's based off of a manga series that ran from like 2006 to 2014, I think.
Oh, it
And it
ran that
only
long.
has 12 volumes. So 13 episodes seems proper. So it does seem to probably have a satisfying ending to what is the driving force of interest in the story. Is like, what are the Kakashis? What was that event that happened? And do you really want the main character to go back to his old life, or do you root for him to find a place in like um, the real world, essentially, quote unquote, real world? Because it's revealed that his crush, his crushes even, or the crush he's interested in, her father is from that village as well. So there's like a lot of tie-in and interconnectedness between all the characters. So even though he's trying to get away from it, it's like, can you really get away from your past? Which, you alluded to in the premise. So it's so intriguing. So I think it's like a solid 3-episode test for me.
Oh yeah, definitely. It passes the 3 episode test for me as well. And as you talk about it, it reminds me of Michael Corleone in The Godfather. I think it was Godfather 3. How he was saying every time he tries to leave the way of life, or leave the life of crime, he's always being pulled back in. And you definitely get that sense with Kyohei, in the sense with him, he tries to live his life, and yet still the problems of his past still come to haunt him, mainly because he himself hadn't reconciled with what happened with himself personally, and that unknowingly affects other people. So seeing that, and seeing him having to go through and find his own answer, would definitely be a good story to watch. And again, just because all the other supporting characters, it's just done, they're so done very well. Even the crush Hibino, she is a great contrast, because she tries to take out Utao, the younger sister. She tries to take her out and explore the world a little bit, because all she knows is the village, and she doesn't go to school because she has her own special curriculum that the village gives her. So they're going out in the park, and they try to make it a quote unquote training exercise as an excuse for them to leave, and basically have her control the Kakashi in the water in the lake that they're walking by. And it's just a very good comedic moment, because the characters are being themselves. We see in the show that Utao has an affinity to this particular Kakashi. So mainly we get that from Kyohei, saying that she's able to do a lot more than what he was able to do when he was her age. So she's particularly strong, but she needs to have that refinement. And we see her try to practice her precise skills, trying to play video games with the Kakashi, and playing this racing game. And things turn out for the worse, just because she's a kid trying to use this giant robot to control this very fine, precise equipment. And then we see her do something very similar when she's out there in the lake. So the comedic beats are done very well, juxtaposed against the serious nature of the show, and it's just a very good balance, in my opinion. And as you said, passes the 3 episode test with flying colors. And as we wind things down, with me, I definitely give this a resurrect, as we need more shows like this with what they're doing, and with the great strong characters that it has. But Jay, what about you? Do you think that this show needs to be resurrected, or there's been too many mechas out there with cute little girls?
It was weird that, again, I'm thinking about like, what can I say? Like, how does a series compare to other shows that I've seen before? And like, again, it comes down to like, I think like something maybe close enough that I would make the comparison is, oh my god, it's not, it's Bokurano. It's the mech about the kids that, oh, I don't know if that's a spoiler, but it is. I think it's in the premise of the show, but it's like there's this group of kids and they have to basically get into this mech and it's 15 of them, and every time they get into the mech, it kills one of them essentially.
Oh, snap. I feel like I need to watch that show, but continue.
Yeah, so it came out a couple years earlier, so I think it's 2007 or 2008, but it is vibes with the show so much because I think it's something with the Brainsbase character designer. I should know their name, but I don't. But it's something that very much unsettles you, not in the kind of paprika way or perfect blue kind of way, but it's almost photorealistic enough, somewhat, that it does underline those serious tones with those strong comedic elements, as you mentioned, because if you're trying to capture like what really makes humans, I guess, what makes a human story like essential, it's that relatedness. And like you said, this is a story of a college student not knowing their place in the world. It's not the same adolescents not knowing their place in the world because, adolescents just don't know the meaning of anything. That this seinen story is more of like, okay, so now that I know who I am, did it matter at all? Essentially, like, did I go through all that trauma in my childhood for a good reason? Thinking about maybe how Steven Universe kind of addresses that same idea. It's like, if children are given godlike powers, how do they turn out when they're grown up? And I think that's something beautiful, essentially, in these first 3 episodes. That's that the main character is dealing with. Like, he's passing this responsibility on to his younger sister, and like you said, like, she doesn't hold that grudge against him. She's still that child trying to, like, oh, I'm being groomed to have this great responsibility. I feel honor and I need to do my part. And then the adults or the older children essentially in the story are like, yeah, but you should still be a kid. And that comes from a perspective of, yes, adults will mess up your life if you let them. So I think that's like the heart of the 3 episodes, and I definitely think it is a resurrect for that reason, that I want to see where the story pushes that motif or theme that childhood can be damaging. I'm thinking now about the Steven Universe comparison, but also like maybe a Ben 10 comparison, because I forgot which Ben 10 it was, but kind of that same idea. Ben 10, the American cartoon show, he gets an all-powerful watch and can become God, and then there's a version of him older that follows like his life and like the trauma that having that kind of power alters your thinking, changes like how you view the world. And I think that's what the show is going for. So there's other mechas, I think, like Shadowstar and Lagrange, that kind of cover the same materials, but taking that dark approach to addressing what happens when children grow up, essentially. So I'm going to say, and you know how I like my trauma, but I'm going to say that this is definitely a resurrect because I don't see a lot of stories. We saw last year Sing Yesterday to me, and I think that would be like another, but that's more slice of life, and this is, it has the psychological thriller, supernatural element to it. So I'm going to say, like, exactly like you said, like, this isn't like any other anime I've seen, and people should definitely know about it.
Definitely. So hopefully with this double resurrect from both of us, it would definitely boost it back, and it would be given the due credit that it deserves in the anime community. So again, that's a strong resurrect from me. It's a strong resurrect from Jay, and that's what we have for you all in regards to Kamisama Dolls. Now, next time we will be watching Hotarubi no Morie. And Jay, I believe that this was your pick, correct?
Yes, it's by the same mangaka that did Natsume's Book of Friends, and they had a very good year this year. So I wanted to follow up with this kind of story because I actually didn't know this movie existed, but I've always seen its main character. I think the main character's name is Sho, but he has a white fox mask, and he's like confined to a forest, and it's essentially a slice of life story of him and a young girl that he encounters. But we'll talk more about that. But it's just like one of those images in the anime community like you see and you're like, oh, that's where that's from. So I'm glad we're getting to cover it.
No, very good, very good. And hopefully it would start to explain a little bit like why we see a lot of the Fox Max masked motif that we've seen in other animes, such as Demon Slayer, or the only other example that I can think of is Fortnite. But we won't talk about that right now. So, aside from that, Jay, what have you got for us today?
What I got is a question for you. Crazy? I was crazy once. They locked me in a rubber room with dolls. The dolls made me crazy. Crazy? I was crazy once. They locked me in a rubber room with dolls. Dolls made me crazy. Crazy? I was crazy once.